changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. It's Friend Friday, and that's when we get to talk to a really super person. And today, I am very honored to be introducing you to Jack Canfield, who is the co-founder of Chicken Soup for the Soul. Jack is an award-winning speaker. He speaks all over the world about personal development, peak performance strategies. He speaks to business leaders, to housewives, to everybody in between. He has been teaching entrepreneurs, educators, corporate leaders, and people from all walks of life how to create the life they desire. And we are very grateful to Jack for having started Chicken Soup for the Soul, which we bought from him and his co-founder, Mark Victor Hansen, in 2008. But Jack remains a very important part of Chicken Soup for the Soul and one of its owners as well. So, Jack, welcome to our Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast.
My pleasure to be with you, Amy. Thank you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of Chicken Soup for the Soul for people who don't know the amazing thing that you did getting this started 23 years ago. Can you talk about those early days?
Sure. Basically what happened is, I started getting asked by people, that story you told about the puppy or that story about the Girl Scout who sold 3,000 boxes of Girl Scout cookies, is that in the book anywhere? And I'd always have to say no. And then eventually one day kind of hit me, I'm supposed to put these stories in a book. So I spent a year writing 2 stories a week. I thought if I did that for a year, I'd have 100 stories. And about 3/4 of the way through that, Mark and I reconnected, and he said he wanted to be involved with the book. And so I said, if you can find 30 stories, because I have 70, you can do it, which he did. We took the book to New York to sell it. We were turned down by 21 publishers over the course of 3 days. We went, I think by the time we finished, 14 months later, we had been turned down by 144 publishers. So we had to stick with it. It's a real great story of perseverance and never giving up on your dream. But that book, which our original publisher said, well, you'd be lucky to sell 20,000 copies. We said our dream is 150,000 by Christmas and $1.5 million in a year and a half. And I think we had 135,000 by Christmas and 1.3 million in a year and a half. And everyone stopped laughing and stopped making fun of the title and said, I think these guys are onto something. And so we started doing sequels, which now, God, I don't even know the total number, but it's got to be close to 250 books, I would think.
You're correct. It is. And I've lost count. I know I've done about half of them since we took over in 2008. And I've continued to do exactly what you guys used to do. It's 101 stories from 101 different people so that you're hearing advice from real people telling you about real life stories. And therefore, the advice is advice that people can actually implement because you don't have to be a superhero to follow the advice in these stories. And so we have stayed true to the format that you came up with originally. It's so powerful. And I don't know if you've been watching the different anthology publishers who have tried to compete with Chicken Soup for the Soul over the years, but not a single one has succeeded, even though many of them have tried to publish stories from the same writers who regularly appear in our pages. Every single potential competitor has failed. There's nothing like Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Well, it's really interesting. I think the first knockoff series that came out was something like Chocolate for a Woman's Soul or something like that. And I remember meeting this woman who had contributed a story to that. I said, why did you send it to Chicken Soup for the Soul? She said, I didn't think it was good enough for you guys because I know your stories are amazing. So I think that's why nobody's ever been able to come up and do the same thing we've done.
So one of the things that I did was 3 years ago, I wanted to remind everybody what Jack did 20 years ago in 1993 when it started. And so 3 years ago, we put out the original Chicken Soup for the Soul book again, but we called it the Chicken Soup for the Soul 20th Anniversary Edition. And it contained all of everybody's favorite stories from the original book, plus 20 new bonus stories for the next 20 years. And Jack, you gave us a story for that book.
No, it was a great addition. I loved it. The great stories you added, so you did a really good job, Amy.
The other thing we did was we put out a book called Reader's Choice at that time, where we had people let us know what stories affected them most from all of the past books. And then they wrote a new story about how an old story affected them. And you probably won't be surprised when I tell you that the favorite story that came up the most from the people who sent us their Reader's Choice selections was the story about the starfish. Right? And I actually did a podcast a few weeks ago about that starfish story, about the man walking down the beach and throwing in the starfish that were beached on the sand, and somebody saying to him, well, how can you possibly make a difference? There are thousands of starfish here. And the man said, as he threw a starfish back in, I made a difference to that one. That is such a great story. I think that the original Chicken Soup for the Soul book was worth buying just for that story.
Oh, that's cool. Well, all those stories that were in that first book, most of them Mark and I were telling in our speeches, and they were the result of 20 years of, calling stories that made a point that we wanted to make in our talks about overcoming obstacles, being more loving, going for your challenges, going for your dreams. And so that first book is still my favorite book, and the upgrade you did to it was really great as well, because it represents so much of my life, and what my values and my beliefs are. And so it's a phenomenal phenomenon. I mean, even though that's redundant, but I just really love this series. It's been, people say, what's the greatest, achievement of your life? I'd have to say, the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, no question.
Well, you're still very much identified with it. And I know every place you go, people congratulate you on having founded the whole series. And of course, we've been trying to do more and more with the Chicken Soup for the Soul feeling, applying it to additional products. You guys had started the dog and cat food business, and we have continued with that. It's a super premium food, and it fits the Chicken Soup for the Soul model because people love their pets, and it's about nurturing your pets and caring for them to the best of your ability. So we've continued with that, what I would call brand extension. And now we have this new podcast series, which, by the way, is going incredibly well. Our number of downloads per day are soaring, absolutely soaring. So we know we've struck a nerve here, and people are definitely listening to the podcast. And then of course, about our Saturday morning television show, our upcoming movie. So it's been really fun taking the wonderful concept that you created, keeping it going with the books, and then bringing it into other areas so that we can spread the Chicken Soup for the Soul message in other ways as well.
Well, I have to tell you a funny story about pet lovers. I actually didn't want to do that book at first. Someone said, we should do Chicken Soup for the Pet Lover Soul. And I said, pet lovers? Are you kidding me? Dogs and cats? And I own dogs and cats, and I love dogs and cats. And then Marty Becker and Carol Klein showed me that there are actually more pets in America than there are people. I didn't know that. There's about 2.5 pets for every person in this country. So I said, okay, let's do it. And when that book came out, and I think it sold 6 million copies in the first couple of years, blew us all away. And obviously, because people have that same feeling of love for the Chicken Soup books as they do for their pets, that brand extension into pet food was a natural way to go.
So we've been having a great time with dog and cat books, and I've been putting out a new pair of them about every 18 months. And we are so passionate at Chicken Soup for the Soul about helping to promote the adoption of dogs and cats from shelters. And now what we're doing is we're using our dog and cat books as fundraisers for the American Humane Association. And we're giving royalties from our dog and cat books to AHA to help them in their work caring for shelter pets, promoting the adoption of rescues. And so we've continued in that same vein, and it's something I'm very proud of. We've been actually taking the books and using them more and more to raise funds for various wonderful nonprofits like American Humane Association. Right now we have a Mother's Day book out that is going to give its royalties to the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. And then I have a book going to the printer right now that's going to give royalties to the Bob Woodruff Foundation to help veterans coming back from overseas. Yeah, so it's a great formula for making people feel good and for using proceeds to benefit wonderful nonprofits.
Well, you're carrying on in the tradition. Mark and I always tied 10% of every book to a charity related to the topic, including the American Humane Association way back when, the ASPCA and so forth. So glad to see you continuing to do that. That's fabulous.
Yeah, it's great to be able to do that. It's wonderful to be a socially conscious company and be able to make payroll and, generate profits for our investors, but also raise money for nonprofits and do so much good. So thank you for having set that all in place. I wanted to ask you, Do you have, I don't know, a few tips that you learned from Chicken Soup for the Soul that you want to share with everybody?
Well, I think what I walked away from Chicken Soup for the Soul with after all those years is that everybody's extraordinary. We talk about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but I think early on we learned everybody has a story. Everybody. Now, they're not all great storytellers, but everybody has a story to tell. And so I think, I traveled just recently to Russia and Romania and India and Thailand and Oman and the Middle East and so forth. And everywhere I go, people know Chicken Soup for the Soul. I was speaking to 600 CEOs of corporations in Oman, which is a little country off the side of Saudi Arabia. I said, how many of you have read a Chicken Soup for the Soul book? Everybody in the room raised their hand. 600 people, men in Arabic. And I just thought, holy mackerel, this is amazing. And so I think that's really critical. And I think, the stories all carry pretty much the same message. Open your heart, be generous, take risks, go for your dream. There's no obstacle that you can't overcome in the pursuit of doing something meaningful, for both yourself or someone else. And so I really think that, as we live more open-hearted lives with more compassion, and, it always comes back to us, as, Chicken Soup for the Volunteer Soul book proved, that we always get more back when we give than when we, than what we give other people. And so I think there's just a tremendous amount of joy that comes from people when they live in gratitude for what they have, generosity, trust, courage, perseverance. Those are, to me, the main messages, I think, that we take away from the stories in the books.
So I know you have some new projects you're working on, and I wanted everybody to hear about them because everybody's so fascinated to hear what you are doing post Chicken Soup for the Soul. So I know that you have a new book out, The 30-Day Sobriety Solution.
Yeah, the latest book is a 30-day sobriety solution, and it came about because one of the people that had been having tremendous success helping people get sober, normally the success rate is 20%, in rehab and 20% in AA. He was getting 80%, and turns out he was using a lot of information from my book, The Success Principles, which I wrote. And so those techniques, which are, let's call them human potential techniques of meditation, visualization, affirmations, goal setting, EFT, tapping, all these kind of breakthrough technologies. And so we wrote this book, The 30-Day Sobriety Solution, How to Cut Back or Quit Drinking in the Privacy of Your Own Home. And now the book's been out since January 19th. We already have about 70 positive reviews on Amazon.com. People that never thought they could quit drinking and couldn't afford rehab and were too ashamed to go to AA meetings and be public about it have been sober for 60, 90 days, and it's just an amazing program. And now a lot of the rehab centers are starting to use the technique. So if you have that issue in your life, whether it's excessive drinking or alcoholism, or anyone in your family does, the 30-Day Sobriety Solution is a great book. And people would just go to the 30daysolution.com, just 30day solution.com. And also, if you want to get my book, The Success Principles, you can go to jackcanfield.com or go to amazon.com. And the last thing we're really excited about is we've developed a training program called the Online Train the Trainer program, where I'm training people in all the techniques I teach on success. And you can actually get certified as a Success Principles trainer online. And we now have 1,000 graduates in 79 countries around the world teaching this. And people that are wanting to make a bigger difference are saying, I want to teach this work. I'm tired of just being a corporate employee. I want to do something meaningful like the Chicken Soup books or like the Success Principles. And so it's really, really working well. And we're very excited about it. And just go to jackcanfield.com and find all about all the things we're doing.
Well, that's really exciting. It's great to catch up with you, and I think we'll probably do it again in a few months on this podcast and keep in touch.
I would love to.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. We're really proud to have taken over your legacy, and we're continuing it and doing, I think, a really good job promoting the same principles that you started Chicken Soup for the Soul with. So I want to mention to everybody that if you want to read the book that started it all, the one I mentioned before, it's the Chicken Soup for the Soul 20th Anniversary Edition. And I'm Amy Newmark. Thank you for listening today. And next time we get together, we're going to talk about something that you can do for yourself. We're going to talk about treating yourself the same way that you would treat a guest in your home.